It's an interesting line of attack that Sunak is making, and one which I'm surprised they haven't made more strongly before. It seems quite obvious to me that it's going to be very difficult for a Starmer government to do any of the things it says it's going to do without raising taxes, but they say that they won't. I'm reminded very much of the 1997 election, when so many of the most important things which the Blair government was going to do, from independence of the Bank of England to the huge raid on pensions, to the appointment of Alistair Campbell and Jonathan Powell to give orders to civil servants when they had no elected office. Those enormous things which New Labour did, we knew nothing about.
This was the first question, I believe. It's from a lady called Paula, and this is an ITV viewer question. She said she told Rishi Sunak that she felt he didn't understand how she felt, and that she struggles to pay her bills.
The plan is working, of course I know. Everyone is only just starting to feel the benefits of it, but inflation is back to normal, wages are growing, taxes are now being cut. Keir Starmer would put all that progress at risk. He would put up everyone's taxes by £2,000. £2,000 in higher taxes for every working family in our country. After all the hard work and sacrifice we've been through, that's not the right course of action. I don't know why you want to put up people's taxes.
Keir Starmer.
Paul, I just don't know how you feel when you hear a Prime Minister say, having heard what you're going through, that the plan is working, it's all right. I meet so many people who are struggling with their bills, and the Prime Minister just keeps saying he lives in a different world, that
but Keir Starmer, if people are struggling with their bills, why do you want to make it harder for them by saddling them with £2,000 worth of higher taxes? How is that going to make Paula or anyone's life easier?
Could you respond directly to Rishi Sunak?
This is the Prime Minister who's been part of a government that has put up tax 26 times.
Interesting interruption there from Rishi Sunak. Peter Hitchens, let's just come to you for your immediate reaction to that. Does that enlighten you? Your first impressions?
It's an interesting line of attack that Sunak is making, and one which I'm surprised they haven't made more strongly before. It seems quite obvious to me that it's going to be very difficult for a Starmer government to do any of the things it says it's going to do without raising taxes, but they say that they won't. I'm reminded very much of the 1997 election, when so many of the most important things which the Blair government was going to do, from independence of the Bank of England to the huge raid on pensions, to the appointment of Alistair Campbell and Jonathan Powell to give orders to civil servants when they had no elected office. Those enormous things which New Labour did, we knew nothing about until after they came into office, and there has to be some strong suspicion that there is going to be a pretty hefty raid on our pockets of a sort which we're not being told. So I'm not surprised he's going for that. I'll see how he gets on. What I noticed from the clip, maybe it left out an important exchange which negates what I'm about to say, but Starmer didn't seem to be very heavily denying the suggestion that his government put up taxes.
Yeah, well, I can give you a little bit of insight on that just from some of the live feed that I'm getting through here. So Starmer, you're right, sympathises with Paula, and then Sunak repeatedly then says Starmer would put people's taxes up by £2,000. He repeats that figure, and Starmer doesn't challenge it initially. He stays focused on the cost of living, but when he does try to challenge it, and he does, Julie Etchingham cuts him off and says they want to come back to that later. So that's a missed opportunity. That is, talking too much about the question and not responding to the attack. And of course, what Keir Starmer should be saying, Michael Binion, is changes to non-dom tax rules, clamping down on tax evaders, VAT on private school fees. Those are some of the ways that they intend to fund their policies. But as has been pointed out by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, that does not go far enough in terms of making it all add up. We've had a question on the NHS as well. And each leader, Michael Binion, and this is where, personal stuff comes into it. Each leader has a claim to the NHS, of course. Starmer saying his wife works in the NHS and his mum worked for the NHS, and Sunak saying his dad was a GP and his mum was a pharmacist. So on NHS credentials, they've both been able to make the mark on that. But Starmer here now challenging Sunak on waiting list figures. And Sunak cracking a bit of a joke. We'll try and get some audio of this if we can. We are limited as to what we can run on the show tonight. But Keir Starmer challenged Rishi Sunak on waiting list figures. Sunak is supposed to be good at maths, says Starmer, but the waiting list number is higher than it was when the promise was made. And Sunak says they're coming down because they were coming down from where they were when they were higher. This prompts laughter from the audience. I don't think I've landed that one particularly well. Michael Binion, what do you need to see from both the leaders in terms of personality? Do they try and land a joke? Because there will be people watching who aren't forensically listening to the policy points that they're making, but instead are just getting a feeling for each person.
Yes, they've got to come across as people who are both competent, capable and able to handle whatever comes at them. And they've got to be people who've got a sort of vision. I mean, I think it's going to be more difficult for Rishi Sunak because, he's been there, he's got to account for everything he's done, and so he's open to attack on all sorts of fronts. Now, Keir Starmer, he doesn't have a record. I mean, he's not been in office, so you can just attack what he thinks he might do or what he says he might do. Nobody really knows what he will do. And I think this is the difficult thing. I really do think on spending, Labour's in a difficult position because they do want to do all kinds of exciting things, much of which I agree with. But if they don't have the money, they can't do any of them unless they cut all sorts of other things. And where are they going to do it?
I said that was a joke earlier. I'm now rereading it and basically understanding that the reason why I got a laugh from the audience was because Sunak's comeback on the NHS waiting list was so kind of ridiculous, I suppose. His line that they're coming down because they were coming down from where they were when they were higher. It's sort of a bit of a kind of an exasperated laugh from the audience, as if to say, well, that's okay then. What else do we want to talk about? It appears to me, and what we're hearing from the feed, Peter Hitchens, is that Sunak is doing much more interrupting of Keir Starmer than Keir Starmer is. And Starmer said, if you'll allow me to get a word in, then I'll explain how we'll get NHS waiting lists down. Sunak's got to really judge this one very carefully. When the leadership debates for the Conservative Party leadership happened, he was criticised, wasn't he, for constantly talking over some of the female candidates, notably Liz Truss.
Well, it's difficult in any of these things to restrain yourself from not talking over other people. But the problem with it is that in general, the public don't like it. They think that the person who's doing the talking over is in the wrong. So he'd probably do better to discipline himself, and that is a simple matter. The other point about these debates is that they're really presidential, not prime ministerial. Now we have a half-formed presidential system in which the leader of the party actually is treated as if he were going to become almost head of state, not just head of government. And so people are much more interested in their personalities, probably than they ought to be, than they would have been, say, 40 years ago, when the Prime Minister was much more the first among equals. And that will be a problem if people take against you, whether it's for interrupting or whether it's because they don't like your voice or some other thing, then you've had it. The classic example of this being, of course, poor old Douglas Hume, who looked like a skull and was informed of this by the makeup lady before going on television. She said, "Can you do anything about it?" She said no. And that was it. Whatever amount of Clinique she applied, he would still look like a skull, and that I'm sure that put people off. And maybe the reason why he very narrowly, I have to say, lost the 1964 election, and Harold Wilson very narrowly won it. Talking of which, by the way, there's this constant talk about polls. I was down in one of my favourite resorts, the Times Room of the London Library, the other day, looking up the bound volumes of the Times for 1970, an election I remember very well for various reasons. And it's wonderful to see the election day Times with all three opinion polls saying it's a Labour victory, and the 5 a.m. election edition the following day saying Tories winning. And also to look up John Curtis's predecessor at Strathclyde University, predicting, I think, a 75-seat Labour majority when they lost. I do think people should be a lot less credulous about what the polls say. They may be right, but there's absolutely no reason to be so sure of it as people are. I think it's dangerous in these discussions.
And there are a lot of polls around at the moment. Yeah. One quick-fire question to you. That Julie Etchingham has asked both leaders. What do you think they said? So the question is this: would you use private healthcare if a loved one was on a long waiting list? Would you use private healthcare if a loved one was on a long waiting list? What do you think each leader said, just in a yes or no answer? Michael Binion?
Well, I think they probably said Labour probably said, yes, we must use it if the NHS can't provide it. That's what I would guess.
Okay, and Sunak?
I think he might be a bit more cautious, funnily enough. I think he would say, maybe in the end, yes. Let's see. What did he say?
Peter Hitchens, what did
Well, I'm sorry,
Sunak...
both ought to have said yes. I suspect they probably both temporised and tried to evade the question.
Rishi Sunak said yes. Yes,
Yeah.
he
Oh,
would
good.
use
Well,
private
okay.
healthcare if a loved one was on the waiting
Well,
list.
he can afford it.
and Keir Starmer said no. Yes, exactly. You've got to be careful, Rishi Sunak,
Yes.
because there's already gives
Well,
the
that's the
impression that he's a
danger,
very
yes.
wealthy man. So maybe he walked into that trap. No, says Keir Starmer. He says he's sticking with the NHS because it's in his DNA.
Oh, for goodness'
Like
sake.
it's not in Rishi Sunak's DNA. I love it. I'm going to go really quickly to our last story because I know you want to do it, and we'll just take a quick break from the debate before we return to it at just after 9:35 here on the show with more clips for you. So do stay with us. No politics, please, urges France. This is a story about how the French should be welcoming the UK during the Olympics. How do you best deal with British tourists? You'd have thought that they'd have worked this out so far. We have a video. There was a video. I presume this video is in French because we don't have a clip of it, but it was entitled Winning Tips for Greeting the British, The Gestures and Rules of Welcome. It basically suggests don't mention the royals or politics, stock up on tea bags and talk about the weather. That is the advice. Are they right? Michael
Well, your
Binion?
favourite phrase, that's crackers. That really is absolutely nuts. Talk about the weather. I mean, well, you can say it's much better in France, isn't it? That would get the British.
I suppose so.
What would they say to that? Avoid politics? Why? Actually, Brits quite like having a go at politics. And I think, just talking about nonsense, why not talk about the old cliches, the marvellous food and what about the can-cans and, things about 100 years out of date?
Talk about the history. Any advice from you, Peter Hitchens, if you're a Frenchie trying to welcome the Brits during the Summer
I think
Olympics?
the French should try to welcome us. I think they should continue to treat us with disdain, sneer at our attempts to speak their beautiful language, and generally laugh at us. It's fantastic. It's one of the reasons I enjoy going to France so much. Is to go through these experiences of being looked down on by a rival nation. I
check.
hugely enjoy it.
Look, it's been great to have both of you on. Peter Hitchens, thank you to you. Michael Binion, thank you to you. Really good to speak to you both.